In 2011, 3 students from a high school in Florida die within weeks of each other in separate incidents. But they all had one thing in common. They'd all been hypnotised by their principal. You're watching Totally True Crime. In 2001, George Kenny became the principal of a high school in Florida called Northport High School. Before working in education, George had been a musician, and in the 1980s, he'd been a band director at another high school called Lemon Bay. He'd worked his way up to principal position, and he was well liked and respected by his students, their parents, and his staff. But George had an unusual pastime. He liked to practice hypnotherapy. He had trained at the Omni Hypnosis Training Center in Florida, and he was enrolled in a program that says it includes over 100 hours of training. Part of the teacher's training was how to practice hypnotherapy using required safety parameters. The director of the centre, Gerald Keane, said that George was one of his most compassionate students. George had said he was training in hypnotherapy for one reason: to help other people. He particularly wanted to use his hypnotherapy skills with his students to help them beat anxiety around tests and exams, and to also use it as a motivating tool. George was proud of his newly acquired skill set, and he was open and vocal about how hypnosis could help his students as well as his staff. He didn't have a clinical license to practice, but he had completed his course, and he was confident in his abilities. In Florida, you need a license to practice hypnotherapy in any form that involves self-healing or anything to do with a mental health concern. George created a website and took part in podcasts. He sold CDs, DVDs and books on his hypnosis techniques. In 2006, he started using hypnosis on some of his students and staff members. He would often use it on sports students to try to get them to better their performance. Over the next 5 years, he went on to hypnotise over 75 people. A woman called Kathy Ware, who had 2 sons at his school, said that when she heard about the hypnosis sessions George was offering, she gave permission for both of her sons to be hypnotised by him on a weekly basis. She sat in on some of the sessions, and she said this to SNN6 News.
He helped them. That's all. He just really helped them with everything that they were struggling with. And he basically could get them to go under in a matter of seconds after he had worked with them.
Other parents gave their permission for their children to be hypnotised by the principal, but the school district weren't encouraging of this practice being used so frequently, and they told George to limit his hypnosis sessions to psychology classes alone. But George disregarded this instruction and continued to hypnotise his students outside of the classroom. On the surface, this seemed harmless, but in 2011, 3 students from his school would die within weeks of each other. 16-year-old Marcus Freeman was one of the school's best athletes, and he was on the path to becoming the school's star quarterback. But in March 2011, Marcus, who had only been driving for 2 weeks, picked up his girlfriend, 16-year-old Carly O'Boyle, in his Ford pickup truck, and whilst he was driving on Interstate 75, he lost control and the car crashed into the right shoulder before veering off into some trees. Marcus was pronounced dead 15 minutes after the emergency services arrived. Carly was in a critical condition, but thankfully she survived the crash. Marcus's family were given the devastating news that he'd passed away, and the students at the school were informed. He was a popular and well-liked student, and the school's head teacher, George Kenny, made sure there were grief counsellors available for the other pupils and staff at the school. It emerged that Marcus had just attended a dentist appointment shortly before the fatal crash. People were trying to make sense of his death, and 300 of them held a candlelight vigil for him at the school. Local news outlets printed tributes to him, and he was laid to rest. As the Northport school community tried to come to terms with what had happened, another tragedy was just around the corner. A month on from Marcus's death, another student from the school, 16-year-old Wesley McKinley, took his own life. He was found hanging from a tree outside of his home. Wesley had been a talented musician with a bright future ahead of him. He played the guitar, and he even had an audition to attend the prestigious Juilliard School of Music. This unexpected and tragic loss of life was earth-shattering to the already grieving school community. As news of Wesley's death spread, another student told the police that Wesley had been acting strange on the day that he died. He said that Wesley had asked him to punch him in the face as they got off the school bus. Grief counsellors continue to support staff and students at Northport School. But another tragedy was about to disrupt the community again. A 17-year-old student called Brittany Palumbo took her own life a month after Wesley in May 2011. Like Marcus and Wesley, Brittany was a gifted student. She was popular, and she was a member of many of the school's extracurricular activity clubs. She also adored her pet cat, Joe. She had 2 loving parents and a brother, Ryan, who was also a student at the school. There had been no warning signs that she was planning to take her own life. She was found hanging in her closet in her bedroom by her family. Within 9 weeks, 3 students from one school were dead. But their position as students at the school wasn't the only thing they had in common. All of them had been hypnotised by their principal, George Kenny. The school district started an investigation into the deaths of the 3 students, and it was discovered that all 3 of them had been hypnotised by George Kenny before they died. In the case of Marcus Freeman, he had been hypnotised by George on more than one occasion. But not only that, George had taught Marcus self-hypnosis. Marcus was suffering with pain during football matches and when playing sports, so he had engaged with the hypnotherapy in an attempt to stop the pain from affecting his performance. On the day he died, he'd been to the dentist, picked up his girlfriend, who told the police that Marcus had a, quote, strange look on his face moments before he lost control of the car. The dentist appointment had caused Marcus some pain, and it was thought that potentially Marcus had tried to self-hypnosis to get rid of the pain. Wesley McKinley was hypnotised by George just hours before he took his own life. He was engaging with the hypnotherapist because he was anxious about an upcoming audition that he had for the Juilliard Music Academy. He was nervous about travelling to New York, and his principal had said that the hypnotherapy could help calm his nerves. Brittany had been hypnotised by George 5 months before she took her own life. She'd engaged with the hypnosis because she'd received some bad results in her exams, and she wanted help with anxiety around taking future tests. Whilst there was a passage of time between the hypnosis and her suicide, her mother said that she believed on the day she took her own life, she closed her eyes and entered a relaxed state, which diluted her reality and the horror of what she was about to do to herself. Her test scores hadn't improved, and she'd remained anxious around her future. The school district hired a private investigator to look into the 3 deaths, and when George was questioned about his interactions and hypnotherapy sessions with the students, he initially lied about his involvement with Wesley and Brittany. But the investigation uncovered evidence that proved he had hypnotised both of the students as well as Marcus, and he was placed on administrative leave. During the investigation, other shocking allegations came to light. Some students reported that George had hypnotised them and they'd had adverse reactions. They'd been made to do humiliating things. In a deposition, one student said that he had been hypnotised in a hotel during a school trip in Orlando. George had invited any of the 50 students present on the trip to come to his room at 8 p.m. one evening if they wanted to experience hypnotism. Around 30 of those students piled into his room, and at least 4 of them were hypnotised. They recalled hearing music playing and hearing a ticking sound as they were put into a trance. One student said they recalled going into a relaxed state, and he said he remembered hearing George tell him that he wanted him to have a good day and to remain safe. He was put under the trance, and then when he came out of it, he would see numbers as Chinese letters. The student reported being confused and went missing for 25 minutes. He was found walking around the corridors of his hotel because he couldn't read the numbers on the rooms and there were weird lines in front of his eyes. The student reported having memory issues years afterwards. Another student said George hypnotised some of the boys that night and made them put lipstick on. One boy said he woke up in his hotel room wearing lipstick and women's pantyhose. He also found money on himself that didn't belong to him. He didn't know where he'd got it from. Another student said he was only able to read Braille after a session with the principal, and that everything he tried to read in writing looked like gibberish. In a video George filmed of himself hypnotising a male student, it shows the boy go under and then fall asleep on George's lap. The boy's parents were in the room, and he said if they had not been there, he wouldn't have allowed him to rest on his lap. During interviews with George, investigators discovered that he hadn't warned the parents of the students that there could be adverse side effects for them after the hypnosis, and he also hadn't checked if they suffered with any mental health issues. He argued that after 30 years of teaching, he knew which students would be appropriate candidates for hypnotherapy. He also admitted that he had hypnotised a staff member's child at his house 3 years before he undertook any training. Many of the parents of the children that he hypnotised on school trips and in the school premises hadn't given consent for their child to undergo this treatment. On another occasion, George had hypnotised a student who had been injured in the school's gym, but instead of going straight to the school nurse, George treated him first, and then the nurse tried to administer medical care for him, but the hypnosis had meant she couldn't do this effectively because the student was behaving strangely. She lodged a complaint to the principal's supervisor, who told him that he was not permitted to hypnotise students and warned him to stop. But just weeks later, George was back hypnotising students. As the investigation progressed, prosecutors put together a plea deal for George. He was charged with 2 misdemeanours, including administering hypnosis without a licence, something that is a criminal offence in the state of Florida. He pled no contest, meaning that he wasn't pleading guilty, but recognised that they had enough evidence to charge him. He was sentenced to a year of probation that included a ban on him practising hypnotherapy, and he was made to leave his job, though the school board allowed him to retire on a full pension. The community was split into 2. Many people were angry at the unregulated hypnotherapy that George had been giving to students, and of course there were 3 families who believed that their children were dead because of his actions. But there were also many people supporting George. Some of his staff members, other students and their families had thought a lot of their school leader, and they stood by him. They said that he had nothing but good intentions, and that this was a series of tragic coincidences, that 3 of his subjects were dead within weeks of each other. SNN6 News spoke to students and staff outside of Northport High School, and many of them were vocal in their position to stick by him.
He always had someone there with us, so nothing bad ever happened. I remember just being completely relaxed. Nothing bad happened. It actually improved my game.
It's a sad situation, all around. You don't want someone's career to be over because of this, but the allegations are now what they are, then they are. But it's sad. It's sad for the community.
Dr. Kenny was a fabulous person. a good person and someone who I'm afraid has got caught into a situation that he probably could have avoided but didn't.
Experts were called in to give their opinion on the potential scientific links between the hypnotherapy and the loss of these 3 precious lives. An expert witness was hired by the school board to look into the deaths, and her name was Ellen Gamberg. She's a psychologist and a qualified hypnotherapist. She said that in regards to Marcus, it would have been almost impossible for him to hypnotise himself whilst he was driving. Wesley and Brittany had suffered with mental health issues, and many believed that this was why they had died by suicide. The families of Marcus, Wesley and Brittany banded together and launched a civil lawsuit against George Kenny and the school board. The school board agreed to settle with the families instead of going to a civil jury trial. Each family was awarded $200,000. The deeply sad fact remains that 3 young students lost their lives within weeks of each other in 2011, and the controversy around George surrounding their deaths has often overshadowed the memory of Marcus Freeman, Wesley McKinley and Brittany Palumbo.